Greetings. Welcome to PCAP's Native Prairie Speaker Series. My name is Caitlin Rose-Seiler, and I'm the Stewardship Coordinator with Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan, or SKPCAP. Today, Sheila, who recently completed her master's, will be speaking about how combining herbicides and fertilizers can maybe enhance control of leafy spurge. Before we get started, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations and communities, past and present. For millennia, they've worked to protect these landscapes and the life these areas sustain. I'd like to thank these original caretakers and acknowledge the ongoing work and presence of Indigenous peoples in Canada today. I'd also like to mention that the third week of June, SKPCAP will be hosting the Native Prairie Appreciation Week. It's an annual event. And in celebration of Native Prairie, we'll be hosting 2 webinars as well as a social media contest. So on Monday, June 16th, the RSM will be speaking about urban wildlife in Regina. And on June 17th, author Dale Leckie will be speaking about wildlife, landscapes, and geology, exploring connections. As always, you can register for these webinars on the SKPCAP website. Just click on upcoming events and Native Prairie Speaker Series. A reminder to our listeners out there, as we've got lots of people registered for today's webinar, if you have any questions, just type it into the Q&A section of the webinar dashboard. You'll be muted for the duration of the webinar, and questions will be answered towards the end of the presentation. I'd like to take a moment to note that financial support for today's webinar is provided by our presenting sponsors, Canadian Forage and Grasslands Association, North American Helium, Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association, and SaskTal. Supporting sponsors are Innovation Credit Union and Ranchers Stewardship Alliance, Inc. And I'm really excited to be able to introduce today's presenter. Sheila is a professional agrologist, or PAG, and she has several years' experience working in the environmental consultant field. Much of her work involved targeted selective herbicide application for noxious weed control on reclaimed native prairie oilfield sites. Motivated by a desire to enhance her knowledge and impact, Sheila returned to academia in January 2022 to pursue a master's degree in plant sciences. And beyond her educational and professional pursuits, Sheila enjoys spending time outdoors, exploring nature with her family and her rescue dog. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Sheila.
Thank you, Caitlin, and thank you to PCAP for the opportunity to share my research results today. I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you for making time to be here over your lunch hour today. And hopefully you learn a little something more about leafy spurge. So before we begin, I thought I would share a little bit about me, as many of you may not know me. So I've lived in Southeast Saskatchewan for the majority of my life. I completed my undergrad at the University of Regina, where I studied physical geography and biology. And as Caitlin mentioned, I recently completed my master's in plant science, and that was completed at the University of Saskatchewan. I am a professional agrologist with the Saskatchewan Institute of Agrologists, and I'm currently working for the Ministry of Agriculture. Some of my previous work experience includes working at Lake Diefenbaker, where I was a piping plover research assistant, and that work was with Nature Saskatchewan and the Saskatchewan Watershed Authority. Then I had the opportunity to work with the University of Manitoba out at Grasslands National Park, and there I was a research assistant working on a grazing management experiment where they were exploring grazing intensity versus grassland songbird nesting success. As Caitlin mentioned, I have previously been an environmental consultant. In that role, we did that for a little over 10 years, and so worked in native prairie reclamation and did quite a lot of vegetation management and control. And so out of that was born a passion for native prairie landscapes and controlling invasive plant species. I'm also a wife, and I have 2 grown children. And yeah, as Caitlin said, we have a rescue pup who's, I guess, almost 3 years old now. So he's lots of fun. Okay, so moving into the presentation, can combining herbicides and fertilizers enhance control of leafy spurge? Although this looks like a canola field, it's actually a leafy spurge invasion. And I think it's pretty evident here that leafy spurge can make a pretty big impact. Leafy spurge causes both ecological and economic damage. And ecologically, leafy spurge reduces the number of species. So native forbs often become excluded as the leafy spurge increases. It also decreases grassland productivity. So leafy spurge can outcompete our native grasses for resources such as light, water, nutrients, and even space. Soil nutrients can also be altered. Leafy spurge directly impacts nutrient concentrations as well as nutrient availability compared to the non-invaded areas. And research has shown that there's shifts in the soil microbial community as well. Like areas with leafy spurge invasions tend to support a higher abundance of fungal communities, and that's compared to those uninvaded areas. So additionally, leafy spurge has also invaded millions of acres of land, leading to millions of dollars of economic loss. And this economic loss comes through reduced land values and reduced grazing capacity. So we'll just take a step back here and chat a little bit about leafy spurge itself for a moment. In Saskatchewan, leafy spurge is listed as a noxious weed. It emerges in early spring. So if you were to head out there today, I'm sure you could find some leafy spurge in some areas. It grows to be about 1 meter in height and develops green, narrow, linear-shaped leaves and has a prominent white midvein. And it develops these characteristic showy yellow-green bracts, and these appear in late May. So in the next couple weeks, you'll be able to easily spot leafy spurge with these very showy yellow-green bracts that appear. And leafy spurge is found throughout most of North America. It tends to prefer sandier soils and primarily is found in grasslands, but also can be found in riparian areas and shrublands. It's not typically found in agricultural croplands. It doesn't particularly care for that annual cultivation. So why is leafy spurge so hard to control? If you've ever broken a dandelion, you'll know leafy spurge produces a similar milky white latex, and this latex is not palatable to most grazing animals. It can also be quite toxic as well. So that's problem number one. And if it's not being grazed, then it just keeps growing. So problem number two is that it produces an abundance of seeds. But the thing that makes leafy spurge so challenging to control is its deep rhizomatous or spreading root system. And that's problem number three. Its roots can reach depths of 3 meters or 10 feet. It can regenerate from root fragments under an inch small, and it can spread 5 meters a year. So there's one more thing about leafy spurge that I should share with you, and that is that leafy spurge is strongly AMF dependent. Now, what the heck is AMF? AMF is arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, and these are soil microorganisms that form on roots of plants and help the plant increase its soil nutrient uptake. And in return, the plant shares its fats and sugars. So in this photo I'm showing here, we can see a comparison of roots with and without AMF. And we can see that the plant on the right, which is incidentally not a leafy spurge plant, with the AMF, it has greater surface area, and this helps increase the soil nutrient absorption. So besides helping the plant obtain extra soil nutrients, AMF also helps improve plant growth, helps with seed production, helps with stress tolerance to drought, and can even help with pathogen protection. So this relationship is very beneficial for a plant. This figure is taken from Reinhardt et al. 2017, and I know it's a little complicated looking, but what this graph is showing is that several grassland species from the northern Great Plains and their response to some AMF treatments. The red color is indicating that the species is invasive, and so I've highlighted Leafy Spurge in that green box. So what this column is showing is that is the shoot biomass in response to AMF treatments. And here we can see that Leafy Spurge is showing a very strong response. In fact, one of the strongest responses out of this list. And so this relationship with AMF gives Leafy Spurge a competitive advantage. And why this is important, we'll discuss in the upcoming slide. So we've established that Leafy Spurge has invaded millions of acres of grassland in North America and causes both ecological and economic harm. And we established that it's challenging to control. So what can we do about it? Well, herbicides remain one of the most effective control techniques. However, overuse of herbicides can lead to herbicide resistance. There's also a limited number of herbicide products available for use in grasslands, so it's important that we use these products sustainably. And remember from the previous slide that Leafy Spurge is strongly dependent on AMF and that this relationship is beneficial. So some previous studies have found that AMF can become parasitic in nutrient-rich soil. So the plant can acquire its own nutrients and doesn't really need to depend on the AMF as much. However, the AMF still uses the plant's fats and sugars and is thus acting more like a parasite. So essentially the AMF is taking more resources from their host than they are giving back. So what if we could use fertilizers to create that nutrient-rich environment and increase parasitism of AMF, which in turn could help us control Leafy Spurge? So this is the idea behind our research. And next we'll take a look at our experimental design. So our design included crossing herbicides and fertilizer treatments, and these were done alone and in combination. So some plots received only fertilizer, some plots received only herbicide, and other plots received a combination of both herbicide and fertilizer. So then these treatments were randomized in each of our blocks. And today I'm sharing a subset of the data from this experiment, but the full experiment included 12 blocks with 30 plots per block for a total of 360 plots. So herbicides, we in today's research or presentation, I'll be sharing 4 herbicides, and these were applied in 2022, so year 1 of our study. These were all applied at manufacturers' recommended rates. So we had a control treatment, or essentially no treatment, 2,4-D ester, which is a non-residual herbicide, and then we had Navius Flex and Tordon 2K, and these are both residual herbicides. And residual just means that the herbicide has extended soil activity, and that can help improve the duration of control. So we included the non-residual herbicide because these are generally cheaper products, and we expected that we could better track the effects of the fertilizer. What we found was that the residual herbicides controlled the Leafy Spurge so well that it was challenging to see how the effects of the fertilizer were working. Okay, so for fertilizers, these were applied in both years, so 2022 and 2023 of the study. Again, we had a control or no treatment. We had nitrogen, phosphorus, micronutrient, and the micronutrient included things such as iron, copper, zinc, boron, and a few others. And then we had 2 combination treatments. So that was a nitrogen and phosphorus treatment, and then nitrogen, phosphorus, and micronutrient. The nitrogen in our study was included because it improves grass productivity, and this can help suppress leafy spurge through increased competition. Phosphorus and micronutrient were included, and the phosphorus and zinc, which is a part of that micronutrient, these 2 nutrients have been shown to reduce benefits with AMF. And then we included nitrogen and phosphorus combination because some recent research has found that phosphorus will suppress AMF, but only when combined with nitrogen. So our experiment was set up in the spring of 2022. We selected 4 native prairie sites across southern Saskatchewan, all of which were invaded with leafy spurge. Our first site was located at St. Denis, so that's located just east of Saskatoon. Then we had a site at North Battleford and over at the Manitou pasture, which is located south of the small community of Marsden, like 12 kilometers away from the Alberta border. And then we had a site down in southeast Saskatchewan at Grenville. So our St. Denis site is located in the mixed moist grassland ecoregion and had a dark brown loam soil. North Battleford is located in the aspen parkland ecoregion in the black soil zone, and this site had a sandy soil texture. And our site was located on the south side of the North Saskatchewan River. Manitou site was located in the Manitou Sandhills, and this was within the aspen parkland ecoregion in the dark brown soil zone. And this site had very sandy soil texture. And Grenfell was located in the aspen parkland ecoregion, and this was located along the north bank of the Pipestone Creek and had a black loam soil. So our hypotheses. First hypothesis was that phosphorus and micronutrient would create a nutrient-rich environment and reverse that AMF relationship from beneficial to parasitic, especially when combined with our herbicide applications, which would lead to reduced leafy spurge abundance. Second hypothesis, that herbicides and fertilizers would increase grass growth and improve forage quality in an additive effect. So herbicides would control the leafy spurge and provide greater availability of space and resources for the grasses. And the fertilizer would increase the availability of nutrients. And third hypothesis, that the loss of plant species would be minimized when using the non-residual herbicide, but potentially using fertilizers would increase our loss of species as a result of competitive suppression of the broadleaf species because of the increased grass growth. So essentially the fertilizers would increase grass growth, which would then push out some of those smaller forb species and decrease their presence on the landscape. So for the results portion of the presentation, we're going to take a look at how the herbicide and fertilizer treatments impacted each of the following. So leafy spurge, of course, that's the focus of our study. We're also going to take a look at grass biomass, and so this is forage quantity, which is important for grazing capacity. We'll also take a look at forage quality, and we'll be looking at protein as our metric here. And this is important for livestock health. And we'll also take a look at species richness. And this is a simple measure of biodiversity, which is an indicator of our ecological health. So first, looking at leafy spurge. All the graphs that I'm going to show today are model estimated means with 95% confidence intervals. And so this graph here is looking at the results of leafy spurge with herbicide. On our y-axis, we have the 2023 leafy spurge plot level percent cover, and our x-axis is herbicides. And then our panel is divided by our soil texture, which is loamy and sandy. So here we see that 2,4-D provided moderate control, while the Navius and Tordon provided multi-year control of leafy spurge in both soil textures. And remember that 2023 was year 2 of our study. And so the leafy spurge values for Navius and Tordon are still hovering around that 0 mark. And this is demonstrating the effectiveness of these two herbicides. So now looking at leafy spurge with the fertilizer treatment. Again, we have our 2023 leafy spurge plot cover on our y-axis, and now fertilizers are on our x-axis. And here we can see that it was nitrogen and micronutrient, and not the phosphorus as hypothesized, that reduced our leafy spurge cover compared to the other fertilizer treatments, but not necessarily to the control, although these values do appear to be trending lower. So an interesting find in our results, fertilizers were significant at this plot level, which was a 3 meter by 3 meter size for the leafy spurge control. But at a smaller quadrat level, which is a 0.5 meter by 0.5 meter size, we didn't find significance. And so what this suggests is that there's some scale-dependent effects occurring. And essentially at a smaller quadrat level, we're too zoomed in to see the effect. At that smaller scale, we're seeing some variation in patchiness. And at the larger scale, the variation and patchiness becomes more smoothed out. So I think of it like zooming in on a picture and you see all the pixels, and then if you zoom out, the picture becomes clearer. So what this data also suggests is that we may be able to enhance control of leafy spurge using fertilizers, though further research is needed. So now looking at forage quantity and using grass biomass as our metric. On our y-axis here, we have grass biomass, and this is an average of both years of data. In this graph here in particular, we're looking at herbicides. So herbicides are on our x-axis. And here we see that all 3 of the herbicides contributed to increased grass biomass compared to the control. And so this supports our hypothesis. I think it's important to note, though, that this is likely an indirect result through reduced competition from leafy spurge rather than a direct use of the herbicide itself. So the herbicide reduced the leafy spurge presence and provided space and resources for those grasses to increase, which is an indirect result. So now looking at grass biomass with the fertilizer treatment. And here are fertilizers on our x-axis, and panel is divided by soil texture, and we have loamy and sandy soils. In the loamy soils, we see that it was the combination treatments, so the nitrogen and phosphorus, and the nitrogen, phosphorus, and micronutrient treatments that increased our grass biomass. While in the sandy soils, we see that all 3 N treatments increased grass biomass compared to the control. And so this variation with soil texture can be in part a result of sandy soils being more water limited. And different soil textures often have different soil nutrient deficiencies as well. These results show that fertilizers increased forage quantity, which is in support of our hypothesis. This increased forage quantity with the use of herbicides and fertilizers, I think, is beneficial for producers and their grazing livestock, and also helps to suppress the leafy spurge. So now looking at forage quality and using protein as our metric here. Our protein is on our y-axis, and this is an average of both years of data. Here we're looking specifically at the herbicide treatments, and that's along our x-axis, and now our panel is divided into year. I should also mention that soil texture was an explanatory variable here as well, but I've simplified this graph for greater clarity. It can get kind of busy when the more variables you add in. So in support of our hypothesis, the herbicides increased forage protein compared to the control. Although we do see some variance occurring based on the year. Our 2,4-D levels were not as high in 2023, and this could be a result of the increase in leafy spurge that was occurring in these plots. Remember that 2,4-D is a non-residual herbicide. So now looking at forage protein with the fertilizer treatment. And again, our panel is broken into a year. As expected, and in support of our hypothesis, the N treatments increased our forage protein in both years, and 2023 showed a little bit greater increase, and this is likely a result of that second application of fertilizers that we applied. So this improved forage quality with use of the herbicides and fertilizers is important for the nutrition of grazing livestock and wildlife as well. Okay, so now we'll look at species richness, and this will be our last graph for today. So species richness is on our y-axis, and again, this is an average of both years of data. Herbicides are along our x-axis, and our panel is divided into year. Here again, soil texture was an explanatory variable, but I simplified this graph. So species richness is the number of species present within an area, and this is important ecologically, as more species helps improve the resilience and health of a grassland. So loss of species is considered a negative result. I don't think there's any surprise here that the herbicide treatments decreased the number of species. Our 2,4-D loss was not as significant as Tailon, and we see that 2,4-D species richness, interestingly, increased from year 1 to year 2. And this is likely a result of the 2,4-D controlling some of that leafy spurge in that first year, which provided openings for some new species to appear. And so this can be one of the benefits of using a non-residual herbicide. So these results support our hypothesis that non-residual herbicides would have less of an impact on species loss. However, in contrast to our hypothesis, the fertilizers showed no significant effect on species richness, and so I'm not showing that graph here today. So some key takeaways. Our herbicides, 2,4-D, provided moderate control of leafy spurge. It increased our grass biomass and our forage protein, and also minimized the loss of species within those plots. Navius and Tordon also provided multi-year control of leafy spurge, also increased our grass biomass and forage protein, but these benefits came at the cost of a loss of species. For fertilizers, we saw enhanced grass biomass. The N treatments improved the forage protein, and we saw no significant effects of the fertilizers on species richness. So just a few final thoughts. At the beginning of this presentation, I asked the question, can combining herbicides and fertilizers enhance control of leafy spurge? And to answer this, I would say we found limited support for use of fertilizers for controlling leafy spurge. At the plot level, we saw significance with the N and micronutrient treatments, suggesting that it may be possible to use fertilizer to enhance control of leafy spurge. Though I would say further research exploring, where that level of soil nutrient richness needs to be to flip that AMF association from positive to negative needs to be further explored. And I think this would be helpful for knowing how much fertilizer needs to be applied to achieve max benefit in controlling leafy spurge. And one other thought here is that the use of herbicides and fertilizers is all going to depend on your land management goals, along with any environmental considerations, such as proximity to trees, riparian areas, if you have a high water table, and certainly cost is something else to keep in mind. Other management options do exist for control of leafy spurge. Beetles and sheep and goats have been used with success. Sometimes conservation goals may differ from livestock production goals, for example. So it's important to implement control tools that's going to reduce the leafy spurge along with meeting your management objectives. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all the landowners for their support of this project, as well as all the numerous research assistants that helped me complete this work. They helped make the long days of fieldwork fun. I'd like to thank my sponsors who provided in-kind and financial support. Thank you to committee members, Chris Willenborg, Eric Lamb, and Bill Villigan for their support. And a big thank you to my supervisor, John Bennett, who provided much guidance and direction throughout my master's program. And just a couple of fun photos of all the crew that helped me with this work. Yeah, they're the real MVPs for this project. So thanks everyone for taking time today and listening in. My email address is provided on screen here. So if you would like to reach out for further information or yeah, just reach out. I'm always happy to chat about leafy spurge. And I'll hand it back over to Caitlin. And if we have time, I'm happy to answer some questions.
Thank you so much for the informative presentation. It's an amazing amount of work that you've done. Really found some interesting things. And as I guess, there was already a few questions here from our attendees. To our other attendees, if you have any questions, just type it into the Q&A section on the webinar dashboard. And for people with the same question, you're also welcome to upvote it, or you can also send it to me by chat as well. So the first question, Sheila, is from Charlotte, and she says, what was the composition of non-leafy spurge species? Was it mostly natives or tame? And how did that composition change with herbicide and fertilizer?
Yeah, so that's a great question. These were native prairie sites that were selected. So the composition was primarily native species, which included grasses and forbs. There was some invasive species like smooth brome or Kentucky bluegrass noted in some of our plots, but we really did try to keep that to a minimum just to see how it was impacting the native prairie.
Okay, perfect. And another attendee says fertilizer did not impact species richness, but do you imagine it may over time with continued application?
Yeah, so it was kind of an interesting find, I would say, that we didn't find significance with our fertilizer and species richness. Other studies have found that fertilizer can reduce species richness. So, that was sort of our initial thought too, is that would be the case with our study. So yes, it's definitely something that, if we were to like this research is continuing. There's a PhD student that's working on this project. It's a 5-year project. So I think it's going to be interesting to see um, how this changes, through subsequent years. And certainly, yes, I do think it is something we need to be cognizant of, that fertilization could cause impact because other research has found that to be the case.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's really exciting. There's going to be a PhD come of this.
Hmm.
I'll have to touch base with you afterwards and figure out who it is, and maybe we can
Yes,
have them on in 5 years.
of course, of course.
Yeah. And another attendee is wondering about the timing of the herbicide treatments.
Yeah, so herbicides were applied in June of our initial year, so in 2022. And they were only applied in year 1. We're looking to see how long-term these effects will be throughout the 5 years of this project. So yeah, I hope that answers the question that they were looking for.
Yes, thank you. And we have a few people wondering about clay soils. You talked about sandy and loam soils. Did you
Mhm.
do any work with clay soils?
We did not. So our work was primarily, it was done in the black soil zone and the dark brown soil zone. And we had loamy soils in 2 sites and sandy soils at 2 sites. And yeah, we did not do work in clay. So that is some, maybe further research that would be valuable to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And how applicable do you think the AMF would be in arid or drought areas?
Ooh, so AMF can be valuable for the plant. It can help with water uptake as well as the soil nutrient uptake. So it can definitely help with that drought stress relief for a plant. So I think that it can be very important. How that would necessarily play out when we're trying to manipulate the situation should probably be further explored. I know during our research, we didn't get a lot of rain. And, and so I think we applied granular fertilizer to the plots. And if, you need that rain to help move
Mm.
that fertilizer down into the soil, into the rooting zone. And so there could be some limitations in a drought situation, like we experienced in our study with moving that fertilizer and also the fertilizer uptake perhaps as well. So
Okay. And then we have a question from Al, and he says, did the sandier soils contribute to incomplete data because of the lower pH and nutrient availability in test plots, that this application of nutrients in these lower pH sandier soils would be limited in their usage?
no, I don't think so. That didn't seem to be a limitation in our study. Certainly, biomass amounts were lower just because of the more water limited capacity in those environments. But no, I don't think we experienced any limitations in the data as a result of the sandy soil locations.
Okay, perfect. And Brian Soar, pardon my pronunciation there, from SAS Polytech says, thank you. This helps to illustrate some of the IPM content that I include in my pesticide management courses. How well would this integrate with other control methods, including sheep and goat grazing and leafy spurge beetle control?
Yeah, so that, I mean, certainly further research would be advantageous to know how the integration of more than herbicides and fertilizers would impact control of leafy spurge. I think that's, great research. Certainly anything that I've ever read in the literature review is that integrated pest management is usually more beneficial than using a single tool alone. And so, yeah, I think there's great opportunity for more exploration with, using 2 or 3, maybe even 4 different type of control techniques.
That's really neat. Thanks for that answer. And Maggie says, hi, Sheila, given your research results, is there any benefit to fertilizing huge or expansive spurge populations along with residual herbicides if there are very few native species in the understory, native forbs and / or graminoids?
Well, I don't feel comfortable making recommendations at this point. I think, we don't currently know even to how to recommend how much fertilizer to apply at this point, right? So, so I would proceed with caution if that's an option that a route that you choose to go. Yeah, definitely cost at controlling a large expanse of leafy spurge. And there could definitely be some considerations, like if you're trying to preserve native prairie, or if there is some present, like if you have some smooth brome or Kentucky bluegrass or something, I think you want to be very cautious when applying herbicides and fertilizers in those areas because, and this is just some anecdotal, observations of my own, not necessarily research or evidence-based, is that we can see some increase with those invasive grasses in areas where treatments are applied. So definitely something to consider. Your land management goals are always going to direct how you proceed.
That makes sense. Thank you for that answer. That's all the questions we have at the moment. So I'll give everyone another minute to type in any last questions you have for Sheila. And I just wanted to remind everyone that we've been recording today's webinar and it will be available on the PCAP YouTube channel. You can go to youtube.com/user/skpcap and we'll have it available later today or tomorrow. And we'll also share it on our social media as well. So then you can go back and rewatch something if you have any more questions. And Sheila, what do you think is kind of the next steps for this research? Like you had some really interesting findings. What do you think would be next?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as I mentioned, there is a PhD student that is continuing this research as it's a 5-year project. I sort of think it would be interesting to explore more with the 2,4-D and fertilizers because we were seeing some effects there. And like just even playing around with some of the timing. So we applied fertilizer at this just like just moments sometimes before the herbicide application was applied. And this was brought up by a comment in another presentation that I gave. And the person had suggested that perhaps more of a window of time is needed. So if we would have applied the fertilizer, say in May, and then applied herbicide in June, would have given some time for that fertilizer to sort of take effect within the plot before applying the herbicide. And so I thought that was a very interesting point. And certainly maybe something that could be explored if further research was to proceed with this.
Yeah, that would be really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And why do you think 2,4-D kind of stood out compared to some of the other treatments that you tested?
Well, 2,4-D is a non-residual herbicide, and so it provided really great control in that first year, but it's limited. It doesn't have that soil residual effect, so we didn't see any long or minimal longevity with it then. Like in the second year, we started to see increases of leafy spurge within those plots. And whereas like the residual herbicides were very effective at controlling the leafy spurge, so then we've killed the host, I guess, for the AMF to colonize on.
Makes
So we
sense.
can't really study it if we've killed it. So it makes it a little bit challenging. So I think there's definitely worthwhile research. It would be worthwhile to sort of explore this 2,4-D or other non-residual herbicides and just see if we couldn't improve the efficacy with those. with using fertilizers, right? So
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. And then a question from Al here. Do urban populations of leafy spurge cause problems with adjacent rural grazing lands? Has this ever been problematic?
I have never been posed this question before, but I would think yes. Leafy spurge is a rhizomatous plant, so it spreads by its root system underground, and I don't think it's really, restricted to urban or, like it's gonna go wherever it sort of wants to go, as long as there's, the adequate resources and space for it to. Yeah, I think it would definitely be a problem.
That makes sense. And then Al also says, thank you so much for this stream, for this webinar, educating a city person on the invasiveness of leafy spurge. And I just want to pass that on. Thank you so much, Sheila. You had a
Yeah,
really great
thank
way
you.
of explaining how you took a very complicated topic and made it really easy to understand.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah, why leafy spurge is so invasive. I'm like, oh, 1, 2, 3, perfect. So thank you so much, Sheila, for taking the time to explain this amazing research that you've done. And we're really excited to hear more about what's happening in the future. So thank you.
Yes, yes, you're very welcome. It was my pleasure.
And to all of our attendees, thanks so much for catching today's webinar. When you leave, there's a quick 1-minute survey. If you don't mind filling that out, then we use those answers to report back to our sponsors and keep our speaker series going into the future. And of course, today's webinar has been recorded, so check out online afterwards. And also check out the PCAP website to register for our 2 upcoming webinars in June. And we'll be taking a break in July for the summer holidays. So with that, thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Bye, Sheila. Bye now, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.